step back just a little bit briefly, I want to kind of set a foundation for you. Because to put the Constitution into context, we kind of need to go back to America's beginnings and kind of set a foundation that we can move forward on. So we're going to talk about Pilgrims and where they came from. So chances are you heard or learned in school similar to what I did. And I think it's in most common modern textbooks that the reason the Pilgrims came to America was
religious freedom.
Yes, that's what we're told, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
It is. That's what I learned. And it was a very flat kind of, oh, okay, well, they want a religious freedom. There wasn't any background to that. It was a short and sweet, no depth to that, right? So wouldn't it be nice if we could ask the Pilgrims? Ask the Pilgrims why they came. What drove them to come to this new land? Because, they were, had their families and had their lives and all their extended relatives, and then they just decided one day that they had this ideal that meant so much to them that they were going to move all the way across the ocean. So wouldn't it be nice if we could ask the Pilgrims? So let's try it. Let's give that a try. We'll see what happens. Pilgrims, why did you gather up your wives and children and pile onto a rickety old wooden ship and take a several months long treacherous journey across the ocean to settle in a new land, a world away from your homes and everything you've ever known?
This is clever.
My gosh, they gave us an answer to that question because they knew we would want to know what drove them. More importantly, they wanted us to know. They wanted to put it down in writing so that all their posterity would know why they took this journey. And let me just remind you, because this is something that it resonates with me when I think about this. I think about how common it is for us to pick up a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and jot down some notes, right? I'm pretty sure pens and papers weren't all that common back in those times. I'm just thinking it probably wasn't. So I'm thinking if you're going to take the time to write something down, it's probably going to be pretty significant. You're probably going to put a lot of thought into it. So let's see what they wrote in their own words in that document. And you probably have already read ahead of me. So they said, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. So there they've declared what their purpose is. They undertook that journey for the glory of God and the advancement of their Christian faith. They had strong beliefs and they were Christians and they wanted to not only have the freedom to practice that religion, but to advance it. So while religious freedom, yes, okay, you can say that, but it wasn't just religious freedom. It was Christianity. Their religion was Christianity, and that's what their whole purpose and intent was. So we have this source document told they no longer have the original, but they have replicas of it in old text of the time. So this was duplicated at the time, and that's where we draw that source from. So there you have it, in their own words, having undertaken this voyage for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. So this statement is an absolute cornerstone to the founding of America. It's either completely overlooked by modern historians or just given lip service if it's mentioned at all. So I want you to think about what that means. And there's a quote coming up here from Herbert Hoover that we're going to consider what he has to say about it, because it talks about how our youth are educated. And we talked about, what our modern textbooks, how they describe things, versus what they said in their own words, how they wanted to convey why they took that journey. So Herbert Hoover summed up the importance of such education when he said, "A nation is strong or weak. It thrives or perishes upon what it believes to be true. If our youth are rightly instructed in the faith of our fathers, then our power will be stronger. God has blessed us with heritage. The great documents of that heritage are not from Karl Marx. They are from the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States. Within them alone can the safeguards of freedom survive." And that was a speech you can see he gave at his 80th birthday in 1954. So now you're gaining a much deeper understanding about why those pilgrims came, because we reflected on their very own words and not just what a textbook tells us about religious freedom. So while the religious freedom part remains partly true, it's only a small piece of the much bigger truth. The pilgrims had been horribly persecuted for their religious beliefs in England, and for this reason they fled to Holland in 1608, a full 12 years before they came to America. And in Holland, they had complete religious freedom. So although you can say they came here for religious freedom, not entirely, they did in fact already have it. They were living in Holland. But much of what the Dutch people called freedom in other areas of their lives violated God's laws, and the pilgrims feared for the loss of their children's moral character in such a culture. They came to America for much more than religious freedom. Reading their own words again in the Mayflower Compact, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. If the main purpose of the voyage to America was for God's glory to advance, not just practice their Christian faith, what were the pilgrims' overriding intentions in settling in America? They were actually establishing an entirely new nation for the expressed purpose of advancing, moving forward, increasing the spread and principles of Christianity. So in other words, they were establishing, yes, you can say it, a Christian nation. So another very unique aspect of their purposes is seen in who came with them. And this is also not talked about in the textbook. So throughout history, new lands were discovered and settled by men who were sent by various kings or queens to claim the land and enlarge their empires. The pilgrims came as families. They were husbands and wives and children to establish a new nation under God, not an earthly king or queen. And this is unique in all of history. This is exceptional. So this is the source and true meaning of the term American exceptionalism. A nation founded by families under God for the purpose of advancing the Christian faith. So the pilgrims endured unimaginable suffering and torturous trials of their faith, convictions, and resolve. They persevered and transcended enormous challenges and loss to achieve their goal. The pilgrims declared for all posterity to know the purpose of their sacrifices in undertaking that voyage to settle in America. They wrote it in the Mayflower Compact. So what did they want us to know? What did they write in their own words? What was their stated purpose for their voyage and settling in America? And I know I keep repeating it, but I want you to understand this is what they wanted you to know. For the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. That's what they wanted you to know. So America is not a Christian nation because everyone who lives here is Christian. That's not true. But we are in fact a Christian nation because it was founded by people for the express purpose of advancing their Christian faith. So there's significance to that. And it is our history. And it shouldn't be ignored. It should be acknowledged. And that's just the way it needs to be. Okay, now, to kind of bring that point and expand on it, there is an awesome little video clip out of a movie that you really should watch the whole thing if you ever get an opportunity to. It's a movie called Monumental. And Kirk Cameron is the one who kind of walks you through history, and this is a little snippet of that movie. Thank you. Let me make it bigger.
There's nothing like bones to remind you of your heritage. That's why I like bringing people up here, because it reminds us of our own mortality. It reminds us that we are in a relay race. We're in a generational relay race. And they understood that.
This is Wayne Bradford's grave. That's him. He's the governor for 30 years of the global colony, who lost his wife the first winter, who fell off the back of the Mayflower. She was the first one to die. He's one of those that survived the first winter. He's one that went on and became their governor and their faithful leader for all this time. And they built this for him many years later. But they did put a Hebrew inscription that says, Jehovah is our help. That's from him because he himself taught himself Hebrew to be closer to Moses, closer to the Old Testament, so he could be closer to God. They had a love for God and a love for their families and a love for freedom that brought them to this world. And William Bradford exemplifies that.
I wish they had left us some kind of a training manual, some kind of a secret sauce recipe card that we could pick up and go, all right, here's what it is, here's what we do. What do we do? How do we get back to that?
Now, when the children of Israel were going into the Promised Land, they crossed the Jordan River, and God stood it on end, and they walked across. Before the waters stopped parting, God told them to take 12 stones from the bottom of the river and put it up at the top of Mount Gilgal and make a monument. So that when your children ask, what are these stones? You'll be able to tell them this is where God parted the sea. And that's what the pilgrims left us. They left us a monument that not only gives tribute to what was accomplished here, but it gives us a specific strategy, a breakout of a blueprint of if we would ever forget what made America great, what made us free, we can go back and follow that strategy, and it's right up on a hill a half mile from here.
Right here?
Right here.
It's 180 tons of solid granite. It's the largest granite monument in America, and it's hidden on a hilltop overlooking Plymouth in a residential neighborhood.
I've never heard of this.
Hardly anybody in America knows about it, and yet the people of America put this together over a 70-year period, paid for by the Congress, paid for by the state legislature in Massachusetts, as a strategy laid out and called the Matrix of Liberty that was given to us by the forefathers, by the pilgrims. And those 130 years ago, when they built this, wanted to leave this behind for us, so that if we would ever forget how liberty is built, we would know what to do to regain it.
This is how they did it.
This is how they did it. Now, if somebody else wants to try another way, which is what's happening today in America, we're trying 1,000 ways to turn America around, but this is the way it was done. This is it. The only successful strategy of liberty that has ever been carried out in the history of mankind. Well, let's walk through it. And let's take this strategy apart. What does this mean? What are they trying to tell us here?
So where do you
Well,
start?
her name is Faith. It says so right there. And she is pointing her finger to heaven. Why?
For God is.
For God is. Because her faith is in the God of the Bible. In Jesus Christ. They knew that the only faith that could bring true liberty was a faith in the one true God and His Bible. And you see a Bible there, an open Bible. It's a Geneva Bible. The pages are opened up, which meant that they read it. And as they read it, and as they had faith in God, He gave them wisdom. That's why you see the star on her forehead. She's given wisdom to know how to live in this world. And all of the rest of these statues, each one weighing almost 20 tons, is tied to faith. Because without faith, it falls apart. And that's the beginning of it all.
Where do we go from there?
From here, you need to go to character or morality. And you'll notice
Because that's the internal liberty.
that is the internal liberty, which is the beginning of all freedom. She is called morality. Notice that she has no eyes. That is on purpose because she's looking internal character, the transformation of the heart first, and then that brings external transformation. And notice that she has the 10 Commandments in her left hand and the scroll of Revelation in the right. What would that signify?
The Bible.
Exactly. That if you want to have morality, there has to be a standard. And more than that, there has to be an internal transformation. This is speaking of the need to internalize and allow God to change our hearts and our mind first.
Because in England, you had top-down morality imposed on people. Do this, do that. You're moralizing people, but you're saying their morality started in the heart.
In the heart. It had to be changed here. They realized that just because you said you were a member of a church, like the Church of England, didn't make you a Christian. And you see this over on the side. The side statues give an explanation of what the meaning of this is for us. That's why we need the evangelist. You see the evangel here writing down the Gospels. And there's a need for evangelists. Why? Because we need to have the gospel of the great liberating gospel of Christ that says he came to set us free. First.
So this is completely contrary to the way the rest of the world had done it up to this point. The pilgrims are saying that morality starts internally with the gospel. The evangelist has to preach the message that transforms the heart, and then you want to do what's right, rather than being forced to do what's right from the king who tells you what good and bad is.
That's it.
Okay, what's next?
What's next is, and you see the development of it, if you want to have a free civilization, you need to have civil authority or civil law that will give a base for that freedom. In other words, you've got to have some degree of order in society. And that order, as you see here, is built upon law. The principles of God's law then are related into the civil law. And that's what we see here in his left hand. We also see his hand, his right hand is extended in mercy. Mercy toward those that he's dealing justice with. Why? Because this form of law has a degree of equity in it. You see this in the side statute where it's, yeah. Justice. She's holding the scales of justice with justice and equity, which means that, when a crime is committed, it should be cared for in terms of its punishment. The same for the rich and for the poor and for everyone else. There should be equality under the law. On the other side, we notice that this form of law is different than the laws of so many nations that are built on tyrants, that are built on, if the Aztecs wanted to cut your heart out, they just cut your heart out. Here, mercy. Mercy built upon the base that he offers us, mercy and grace, along with law. And in this form of law, there is that tremendous mercy.
So you have to start with faith. Faith in the true God, that produces the internal morality of the heart. You have a standard by which to judge what good and bad is, and then you create a moral system of law to have a basis for a free and just society that can mete out justice when crimes are committed, but also extend mercy to people and show them grace.
And then that gives you the freedom. Once you have a society that's built like this, now you have a civility in society. Now you can educate your children. Here, they could train them. And you see the lady here in the statue of education. And she is opening the Word of God or the Book of Knowledge. And she has got the wreath of victory she's wearing, about a 25-year-old woman. She is educating her children, and she is sitting in victory. Why is she sitting in victory? Because she has trained her children up in the way they should go and prepared them so that the next generation that came after them would know the strategy of how to carry on the truth and carry on a free civilization. Isn't that amazing?
And what's on her side over here?
Over here, you see her training her child. And she has a book in her one hand, and then he has a scroll where he is writing on the other. And this is youth, trained in their youth. It was the parents' responsibility to educate. And so this would be the mother training up a child in the way he should go.
You know what I think is interesting is that they had just left England and left this top-down government system. So when they got here, their idea of education wasn't send your kids off to a government school to educate them. It was the parents' responsibility to do this, particularly because their worldview was different than the government's worldview, which would have been, no, you're nobody, you're a slave, you just lay down on your back and do whatever the king says, which is sort of the attitude that we get in most governments today, is that you just do whatever the government says. Whereas they're saying, No, it's our responsibility as parents to educate our kids and to teach them faith and internal morality and to understand the importance of fair, just, and merciful laws.
And it's passed down from generation to generation. And if you see on the other side, you'll see how the grandfathers played a role. For it's not just the father. Of course, the father and the mother are the key educators. But the key is the hoary heads. Those are the older ones who also have a role. Because you see the guy with the beard here, he's the old guy. And what do you see his left hand pointing to?
There's a book, and it looks like you get the 10 Commandments again.
10 Commandments and an open Bible. Okay? And so he, being older and wiser, he knows the commandments, he knows the Word of God, and then he is pointing to that, and then on the other side, what do you see up here?
That's the world.
The world, right. So he is teaching the younger generation, both his daughter and his grandchildren, how the world works from a biblical perspective. And all of this leads to something, Kirk, and that's, you see the strategy building from the internal to the external, to the law, to education, to pass it on to the next generation. And what are they passing on? They're passing on liberty. And this is what is the result of living out that strategy. And his name is liberty. We call him Liberty Man.
Look at this guy, he's a
Liberty hero. Now this guy is not a guy you want to mess with, right? And he's seated in liberty.
Okay, explain who this guy is. Liberty Man.
Liberty Man, or the liberty hero that he represents, is the fruit. He is the result of obeying the matrix of liberty that you see on this monument. And he is seated in liberty. Now I want you to be careful to notice these details. Notice that he's holding broken chains in his left hand. Notice that he has, where the chains were, bound to his legs. Notice that he is now seated in liberty. He's got that good look on his face like, listen, I'm free, but I'm looking out, defending my liberty, but I'm free. And notice the claw that is on his right shoulder. That claw relates to a skin that goes around to the left here, and you see a lion's head, an entire lion skin. That ultimately represented the lion of the English tyrant back in those days.
So he has slain the lion.
He's slain the lion, and that's what it says here on the left. Tyranny is defeated, and you see Liberty Man standing over tyranny with his foot on the chest of tyranny. He's holding tyranny down. And again, the Pilgrims won this victory without violence of any kind, except living out God's principles.
You know, one of the things that's striking me is the fact that this is talking about our forefathers, the Pilgrims, but this guy is not some wimpish little religious guy. I mean, this guy is a stud, right?
Yeah.
He's strong. He's looking out. He has just defeated a beast, and he's got a sword in his hand.
That's right.
And he's here to protect, right?
That's right.
He's here to protect his family and to defend the laws that they have made, and ultimately to defend their values and their character, their faith.
Exactly, exactly. And it shows you that if you do it right, you can be strong as an individual, you can defend liberty, and if need be, you can fight. You don't want to fight, but if you have to, you're ready. But the point is, because you've done it God's way, there is a long-term blessing that goes with it.
This is awesome.
This is it. This is it. So Kirk, this is that recipe. This is that strategy, that matrix that was what built America. This is it. And if we want to try something else, yeah, people can try other things. But in the history of the world, the one strategy that has brought more liberty, more prosperity, and more joy than any other is this strategy. Why would you go anywhere else?
Okay.
What's the name of this video?
The movie is called Monumental.
Excellent. Yeah, I bought the DVD. It's a piece of history we do not know. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's only a 15-minute little snippet from it, so it's a really good movie. So we're just laying a foundation. We're going to talk a little bit more about the America's beginnings, because they're really and truly based on the men and women who came here and their Christian faith. And we talk a lot about that, not because we're trying to turn y'all into Christians. It's because it's part of our history and it can't be ignored. It's setting a context for the documents that, when they were written, the underpinnings of them, why they mean what they mean. We have this revisionist history now where the modern day people have applied their own morals and values to these documents, and it completely distorts the original intent of what all the significance was. And I'm going to ask David to give us a quote from John Adams about why it's so important to understand the values and the morals underneath and as the foundation of the Constitution. What did John Adams have to say?
I believe this was when he was in office as president. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other.
Yeah. So there's a significance to that. And what we have now is because we have an immoral society and we've gone away from the original intent of how this government and this society was intended to be. So if we kind of get back to those basic roots, I'm not saying, everybody has to be a Christian in this nation in order for things to work. That's not it. But the ideals that Christians hold, which should not be offensive to anybody. I'm sorry, that's just, I don't understand how any of the values that are held by a Christian today could be found offensive to anybody, but who knows? I'm in this world, but I'm not of this world. Things surprise me on a daily basis of what goes on. So we're going to talk some more about the foundations. We're going to talk about what we call the American view of government, which actually, by its nature, you're going to find out is actually the biblical view of government, but it is the American view, the original Americans, what their view of law and government was. So America was established on a set of beliefs built upon faith in God. That's in our historical documents. There is no disputing that. Our governing documents and our legal system were structured on these presuppositions, and I believe some earlier speakers have already set the stage for this and touched on it. But these presuppositions are, there is a God, our rights come from Him, the purpose of government is to secure or protect these rights. And this is what we call the American view of government. So when we're talking about the American view of government, this is what we're referring to. There is a God, our rights come from Him, the purpose of government is to secure or protect these rights. Where do we get that from? We get that from the Declaration of Independence, and I'm drawing from paragraph number 2, where it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now there's a significant word in that very first phrase, is that they're referring to truths. So they're saying, for one thing, there is something that they view as an absolute truth. So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are born equal. Oh wait, that's not what it says. That all men are evolved equal. No, I think that's wrong too. No, it says all men are created equal. So if we're created, that means there's a creator, right? So they've acknowledged right there that there is a creator God. And that's where presupposition number 1 comes from. There is a God. So beyond that, they say we're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights. So we're created by a creator God. There is a God. That establishes there is a God. And that we're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights. Those are rights we are created with, not born with. We have rights when we're created. The instant we're created, we have those rights. We're not born with those rights. We have them before we're born, is what I'm telling you. So we are created equal. We have rights from the moment of that creation, the moment that happens. And we're in, sorry, I said that. We're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights. But among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We discussed that earlier too. And here's the last presupposition, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Purpose of civil government is to secure or protect those God-given rights. So that is where that is drawn from. It's not somebody's opinion, it's not what we think they meant, it's what they wrote in their very own words. And they state it as if Well, these truths are self-evident. They're not even something that you have to really think about or learn or be taught. They're self-evident because they are. They're an absolute truth. And at the time, they were self-evident to all of the men that put this document together. So there's a significance in that. So that's where we get the American view of law and government. The Institute on the Constitution teaches history with stories and principles from primary source documents, not what someone else wrote about the Founding Fathers, but their own journals, their personal letters, their published articles, and research. Our aim is to study the founding documents looking through their eyes to determine their intent. And through this research and this study, that's how it's come about that we understand that the Founding Fathers held such a strong faith. It governed their whole way of life. All of the documents, the correspondence that we come up with, there's always a biblical reference, or there's a foundation in a faith that is evident throughout all these historical documents, yet the modern textbooks will leave out those details and just give you the very boring little facts here and there. So let's consider the significance of relying on Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, which is another thing we do in the curriculum, is we don't use a modern dictionary. We go back to the era and we look at one of the from the Founding Fathers era, Noah Webster. He wrote the dictionary in 1828, and we use that as a source document. So Noah was a master of 27 languages, and he dedicated years of his life to compiling the first American dictionary. His mastery of languages combined with his strong Christian underpinnings are two main reasons for using this specific dictionary. But the third and greatest reason is to overcome modern revisionist definitions of words and terms. Words matter and their meanings do not change. The following example will dramatically demonstrate this phenomenon. So a modern definition of the word right from a 1968 dictionary says conformity to standards or prevailing conditions. So whose standards would that be? That sounds like a really relative term to me. My standards, or David's standards, or Jason's standards? That's not a really, it's variable, right? Well, according to Noah Webster's dictionary from 1828, his description of right was according to the will of God. Now that's a set standard. We know what the will of God is. It's in writing, it's in the Bible. We have our 10 Commandments, our revealed law. He told us what right and wrong is, and we learned from the teachings of Jesus, but we know what right and wrong is. There's a set standard in the Bible. The other way, conformity to standards or prevailing conditions, well, that just means what's popular in society at the time. But that's a flexible word. That's not an absolute constant. So the modern dictionary declares that right is determined by the circumstances in which we find ourselves, no absolute standard, whereas Webster's 1828 establishes the absolute truth. Okay, the Bible is a primary source reference. We use the Bible as a textbook in its historical context, not to change anyone's belief system. In reality, you cannot teach about our founding era or documents without the Bible because it is what the founders used as their standard. George Washington said, "It is impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible." Knowing the Constitution will enable you to cite constitutional law versus your opinions when speaking to others, and especially when contacting legislators. Elected officials at every level of government take an oath as follows. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. So help me God. When any elected official supports policy or legislation that is unconstitutional, they are breaking their oath and they're breaking the law. The Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." So what does the Declaration of Independence state the purpose of government is? Yes, excellent. Note that they're describing protection of rights, not provision of services. He did not create a central government to take care of people. He created a central government to protect our God-given rights. Our founding fathers studied Blackstone's writings on common law and what Blackstone refers to as revealed law and the law of nature is what the founders called the laws of nature and nature's God. In the Declaration of Independence, the opening paragraph, this is where you'll find that phrase, this is where we get that. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the power of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. From their own words, our founders used this phrase as the basis of all law. If we cannot define these terms, then we cannot understand the very nature and foundation of all law in America. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're going over this foundation to set a principle here. So let's break it down and look at it one part at a time. What are the laws of nature's God? God's law. And are they written down? The laws of nature's God, which is the moral law, contained in the Ten Commandments, written by the finger of God. That's according to Webster's dictionary. That's how he defines the laws of nature's God. So now we need to ask, what is the law of nature? The law of nature, and again, according to Noah Webster's dictionary, a rule of conduct arising out of the natural relations of human beings established by the Creator and existing prior to any positive written precept. Thus, it is the law of nature that one man should not injure another, and murder and fraud would be crimes independent of any written prohibition. What's he mean by all that? In other words, he's saying the laws of nature are intuitively and instinctively known to man. They don't have to be written down because it's what we call our conscience. So one way to explain conscience is this. A sheriff candidate makes a disrespectful accusation about a guest moderator at a town hall meeting and then quickly runs out of the room before the accused has an opportunity to respond to the accusation. So why did he tuck tail and run? He just knows it's wrong. God wrote that on his heart. That was his conscience telling him what he did was wrong. Okay? So now then, let's plunge into some modern day applications to this historical principle. Glad you guys are awake.
That was supposed to be a 2-year-old that runs out of the room after stealing a toy and you had.
Taught this.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So it should be obvious. Okay, so now we're learning all these things of how our government's been operating outside its parameters. It's probably obvious to you all by now also that our tax dollars are being spent for unlawful activities. And they just fund Planned Parenthood, gave them another $500 million or something like that, something ridiculous. So our tax dollars are being spent for unlawful activities, not according to the laws of nature and nature's God. So the following conflict needs to be resolved. The Bible says we are to obey the governing authorities. How do we reconcile this command with obeying laws that are outside the laws of nature and nature's God? Well, we can find in Romans 13, verse 1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. So this verse doesn't seem to answer the question, but only validate the problem. So we're going to look at 3 definitions to the rescue to clarify government authority, particularly distinguishing the difference between power and authority. So power is to exert force. Drawing again from Webster's 1828 dictionary, an example would be a bully on a playground. So should he be bullying other kids? No, probably not, but he does it anyway because he's exercising power. Authority is legal power, and legal is according to the laws of nature and nature's God. So government officials who are ruling within the boundaries of the laws of nature and nature's God are acting under God's authority, and you are bound to obey them. So government officials who are acting outside the boundaries of the laws of nature and nature's God are acting in power. And they're being like the bully on the playground, and you are not obligated to be bound by those laws. So here's my disclaimer. However, at this point in history, re-education of yourself and others, including your legislators, is more important than going to jail, the likely outcome of civil disobedience. So learn the truth and tell others. Then work to find and elect local, state, and federal representatives who will legislate within the laws of nature and nature's God. This is a glaring reason why it is so important to have Christians who have a true biblical understanding of God and government as legislators. They must understand or be taught this key principle or truth. Civil law is valid only if it conforms to the laws of nature and nature's God. So is this really true? Are we misinterpreting this statement, or have we discovered the original intent of our founding fathers? We're going to look again to the Declaration of Independence, this time to grievances number 13 and 19. And grievance number 13 says, "He is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation." They came up with a word for these laws they considered unlaw because they did not conform to the laws of nature and nature's God. They called them pretended. They were not real, and they didn't feel they should have to follow them. So our founding fathers knew the King of England was making up laws and offenses. They were pretended because they did not meet the criteria of laws of nature and nature's God. The same application is true today. So in our legislative branch, any laws that are passed outside the boundaries of the laws of nature and nature's God are not legitimate law. In the executive branch, any instructions or orders issued that are outside the laws of nature and nature's God are not legally enforceable. In the judicial branch, any decisions rendered that do not agree with the laws of nature and nature's God are not binding. So now we get to our three branches of government. Since we just talked about our legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And I'm going to reveal to you where our form of government came from. So our founders formulated this model of government consisting of three branches. And the legal document establishing these three branches of our government is in the Constitution. But there is an ancient source for this governmental framework. It is, in fact, a biblical source. And I have the page marked here. This is from Isaiah 33, verse 22. I'm going to ask you if you can read the highlighted verse. I'm going to ask you to read it one verse at a time. If you need cheaters, let me know. Maybe somebody will lend you. Okay, so from Isaiah 33:22, the first line.
For the Lord is our judge.
Okay, for the Lord is our judge. Judicial branch. Okay, what do we got next?
The Lord is our lawgiver.
All right, look at that. Legislative branch.
The Lord is our king.
The Lord is our king. What do you know? Executive branch.
He will save us.
He will save us. So here we've established this is the source of our three branches of government right from the Bible, right?
It's also written in the Declaration of Independence. The laws of nature and nature's God, the legislative, the supreme judge of the world, the judicial branch, and under the guidance of divine providence, the executive. So even in the Declaration of Independence, that's already there.
Yeah, it's through and through.
Yeah.
Can't be denied. So how many of you would have even thought that this formula came from the Bible? Yeah, but if you look at the historical documents and you read the Federalist Papers, the communications of the time, and the articles that they published, you'll see where they were drawing from.
Even in Exodus, when Moses' father-in-law comes and he says, you can't do all of this yourself. What you have to do is the tens, hundreds, and thousands, which is the legislature, the division, representative government.
Yeah, it goes way back, folks. It's our history. That's something we can't deny. So now we've learned about pretended legislation, and we know that our government's completely out of control. there's got to be some remedies to fix what we got going on here. We're going to start talking about a couple of those remedies. The first being interposition. And I'm going to let Pastor David Whitney explain his views on interposition, and then I'll sum up with another, cue that up, because I'm going to talk about, I'll just make a few more points after he does. But I'm going to switch now to my DVD.
There you go.
We're getting there.
Takes a woman.
Getting
Just goes to show
closer.
you.
Okay, I'm closer. There we go. That's the one I want. Interposition, Pastor David Whitney. All right, guys.
Well, if we recognize the problem we've talked about and understand that there is a standard by which to measure if a law is legitimate, it's not enough just to say that that law is not law. There has to be some action taken on the part of those in position, those who've taken an oath of office, some action taken to actually stop that unlaw from being treated as if it is law, which is a big problem in our day, that most of what the federal government does and a lot of what the state government does as well is actually unlaw. And nobody is stopping them by that standard. If you look at our Declaration of Independence, it's basically a document of interposition. It articulates very carefully, as Michael shared with us at the beginning this afternoon, articulates very carefully the philosophy behind the idea of the stand they were taking. Consider what our founders were doing. They were standing up against the most powerful military in the world of that day, the most powerful navy in the world of that day. The only superpower in the world was Great Britain. And they were saying, Great Britain, sorry, what you've done is unlaw, and we're not going to allow it to be considered law in our land. They were not doing this out of thin air. This was not a theory that they had invented on their own. This goes back into ancient history, not only the history of English common law that we have recorded, but it actually goes back to biblical law. God's word is very clear that those who are in positions of authority in society, when something that purports to be law, but is actually a violation of God's law is put forward, those who are in office, those who are in positions of power, have a duty not just to nullify, but to interpose, to protect their people against the unlaw. It goes this way. If I were to hire a bodyguard, come on up, Christine. I'm going to hire Christine to be my bodyguard today. Let's all thank Christine for being my bodyguard. I know Christine can shoot straight, which is a good reason why I want her as my bodyguard. Now, I've hired her as my bodyguard. Does that mean that we're walking down the streets of Baltimore? It's a bad place to be. You're very likely to get shot at, right? And you know it's dangerous in Baltimore, so you decide on that day that, yeah, you're going to take a vacation. And go ahead, you can take a vacation. Now, I had hired her, and she's abandoned me there on the streets of Baltimore, and when the mugger comes to attack me, what do? My agent, I can't protect myself any longer. She's abandoned me. No. I draw, empty holster here, so there's nothing to draw with. But that is the relationship we have with civil government. We have hired, you can sit down, Christine, thank you. We have hired the civil magistrate to protect and defend our God-given rights. But we don't surrender any of our God-given rights when we hire the civil magistrate to do that. No, not at all. And so that agent-principal relationship must be remembered, that the agent of we the people is the civil government that we created. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where they've taken on a power of their own, kind of like Frankenstein, putting together this monster, and then the monster all of a sudden starts doing things that Frankenstein never intended. Frankenstein was the doctor that stitched up the monster, if you know the story. It's like, whoa, this monster's out of control. It's doing what I never wanted it to do. That's what's happened with our civil government. It's become a monster attacking us and our God-given rights rather than protecting us and our God-given rights. And so if we've hired the civil government to protect us from not just the bad guys that are noted bad guys, the mugger on the street of Baltimore or the murderer that wants to take your life, we've hired them not just to protect us against those bad guys, but the bad guys who are in actual positions of power in the state government and in the federal government. And so if we've hired a sheriff by voting him into office to protect our God-given rights, what happens when the governor of our state says, I'm going to come and steal your guns? I'm going to come take your gun, or if I don't steal them, I'm going to put you in prison. Let's see, I think the prison terms were 3 years, is that right? Or $5,000 fine and 3 years for just simply having a clip that holds 17 rounds in it rather than a clip that holds 10. That makes me a felon, makes me a criminal to send me to prison. Wait a minute. If I hired my sheriff to protect me from unlaw, and in Maryland that piece of junk is unlaw, what's my sheriff supposed to do? He's supposed to protect me from the bad guy from Annapolis who's coming to put me in prison. That's what we hired him to do, and that's what interposition involves. It involves a civil magistrate fulfilling his oath of office. This is a big job, which is why the sheriff needs a posse, why the sheriff needs citizens to stand behind him and help him do that job. It's a big job to stand up against the tyrants in Annapolis or the tyrants in Washington, D.C. It's a big job, and it is, I dare say, a dangerous job. Look at this definition from the Random House Dictionary in 1966. As late as 1966, it was recognized that interposition was the doctrine that an individual state may oppose any, I like that word any, you could circle and underline that one, any federal action it believes encroaches on its sovereignty. Any federal action that violates the Constitution of the United States is not law, and it's the duty of the elected officials at the lower level to interpose to stop that unlaw from being enacted. Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, has a very similar definition. It's the doctrine that a state, in the exercise of its sovereignty, may reject the mandate of the federal government deemed to be unconstitutional or to exceed the powers delegated to the federal government. So this concept is really based on the 10th Amendment, an understanding that we've only delegated very limited enumerated powers to the federal government. The test is there in Article 1, Section 8. Just those 18 things listed, some would say there's 17 things listed, just that list in Article 1, Section 8. If the federal government does anything outside of Article 1, Section 8, it's out of bounds. It's not to be allowed to do so. Our U.S. Constitution is a document of omission. It says these are the only things the federal government can do, nothing other. If it isn't listed there, the federal government's not permitted to tax for it, the federal government's not permitted to spend for it, or to regulate it in any way, shape, or form. Just think of one example. There's hundreds of examples we could talk about. But education. First of all, I've already shared with you, education doesn't belong to civil government anyway, anywhere, any way, shape, or form whatsoever. It belongs to family government, period. Secondly, when we look at Article 1, Section 8, you will see absolutely nothing there at all about education. We the people in forming our contract with the federal government, we have not permitted it to do anything about education whatsoever. Not to take one penny of money and spend it, and I understand the Department of Education spends about $1 billion a year. It has no right to do that. That $1 billion a year that it spends is theft. That's right, you heard me correctly. They are thieving and stealing from the American public whenever they spend money on something they have no authority to spend it on. That is what it's done. So we have to have in our minds a litmus test from our Constitution, and a litmus test from ultimately the supreme law of the universe, God's law, as to what is the lawful and just powers that our civil government has. You know, we're in a very dangerous position. And the sheriffs in our land are increasingly in a dangerous position. This year, February 19, 2013, passed third reader unamended in Colorado, this Senate bill that says the following: a bill gives a special agent, and this special agent is referring to Secret Service, Federal Secret Service. The bill gives special agent, uniform division officer, physical security technician, physical security specialist, or special officer of the United States Secret Service limited peace officer authority while working in Colorado. So it's just limited to the state of Colorado, but the state of Texas is considering a bill very similar to this bill. What this does is give arrest powers to the Secret Service agent in the state of Colorado. The Secret Service agent is a peace officer in the following circumstances: responding to a non-federal felony. Wait a minute, hold on right there. You got a federal officer, Secret Service, he's supposed to be doing federal work, and it says right here, if there's a non-federal felony that takes place or a misdemeanor committed in his or her presence, they have arrest powers. They have powers as if they were a sheriff in the state of Colorado or a deputy sheriff in the state of Colorado. Furthermore, it says they're empowered to effect an arrest with or without a warrant for violations of what? The United States Code. It is sedition. And what they are doing by this bill is they're giving Secret Service agents powers to destroy and arrest the sheriff. That's really what I believe this is about. You see, the Secret Service is an enforcement arm answerable directly to the president and the president only. And violations of U.S. code, that language may mean many things. It could mean a regulation, a court order, or even an executive order. It could mean Obama gun grab. That if the sheriff of a county says no, interposes as he's supposed to do, say no Obama gun grab in my county, what this bill says that Colorado passed, I don't believe it's been signed yet by the governor, but I think he's indicated that they'll sign it. It will mean that the Secret Service could begin arresting sheriffs within the counties of Colorado. Both the president, and I should use that in quotes, the imposter, and vice president, which by the way is the father of Attorney General Beau Biden of Delaware, both have been actively pursuing state legislatures, pushing for the passage of just such bills as this, Colorado Senate Bill 13-013. They recognize, now that 400, as Sheriff Mack has shared with 400 sheriffs have stood up and say, not in my county. You're not doing the Obama gun grab in my county. That many sheriffs have stood up. That's more than 10% of the sheriffs in our country, by the way. They stood up and said no. They're ready to interpose. And now they're being threatened with arrest. Perhaps you didn't catch it, but did you hear Sheriff Mack? That when he interposed on his county, he was threatened with arrest. When he said, no, we're not going to do the Brady Bill. The Brady Bill's not law. We're not going to have that. He was threatened with arrest by the feds. And so the federal government recognizes that the sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in the county, and if they can arrest him and pull him out of the way, they'll have no problem forcing that county to submit to their unconstitutional laws. Which is why interposition is so absolutely important, and why you, each one of you here, is vitally important to the sheriff of your county. Because if you recognize and your sheriff recognizes the threat that faces him, Sheriff Jeff Christopher has taken a bold stand here in Delaware and he's under attack for it. Well, what if the Fed's Secret Service showed up tomorrow to arrest him? Does he have enough citizens to stand against the tyrant and say, no, you're not going to do that here in Sutter County. If you attempt to do that here, you are going to be arrested yourselves because you are the lawbreakers. You are the ones in violation of the U.S. Constitution. You're the ones in violation of the Delaware Constitution. We're not going to allow you to do this illegal, unconstitutional action, this immoral action within the boundaries of this county. And so if you set foot in this county, you're going to be arrested. That's what we need to have happen. And that's what a posse really is. It's people and the citizens of the county that the sheriff can call upon. And this has an ancient history in English common law. William Blackstone in his commentaries, which were understood as the authority in the founding era, and for about 150 years in the history of our country, the authority as to what law was. And it says this: he, the sheriff, is also to defend his county against any of the king's enemies. We could say any of the Constitution's enemies in our lingo, any of the Constitution's enemies when they come into the land, that is, into the county. And for this purpose, as well as for keeping the peace and pursuing felons, he may command all the people of his county to attend him, which is called the posse comitatus, or power of the county, which summons every person above 15 years old and under the degree of a peer is bound to attend upon warning, under pain of fine and imprisonment. That is, if the sheriff called the posse and you didn't show up, you could be in prison for that. You could be fined for that. He has the responsibility to defend the citizens of his county from illegal actions that are coming into the county. And you need a posse strong enough to do that. I really appreciate Sheriff Joe Arpaio, because perhaps of all the sheriffs in the United States to this point in time, he has the most well-developed posse of any county in America. He has a 3,000-member citizen posse. That's right. And if you look at his website, it's amazing the different categories of members of his posse. He's got the cold case posse, that's the posse that looked at Obama's fake thing called the birth certificate and so on. But many different people in many different areas who are volunteering their time and are part of his posse. But the posse has to be trained with an understanding of where law comes from. The posse has to be trained with an understanding of what are the limits upon human civil government, given to us from God's law, secondly, given to us in our constitutions, U.S. Constitution, state constitution. The posse has to be able to stand behind their sheriff with knowledge. And this knowledge is essential. If you don't have, it's hard to function. Now, many people would say, well, that's fine, you're quoting William Blackstone, that's not American law, we don't recognize that as law. Well, Black's Law Dictionary, again, one of those dictionaries recognized by lawyers as authoritative, said this in terms of definition of posse comitatus: the power or force of the county, the entire population of a county above the age of 15, which a sheriff may summon to his assistance in certain cases to aid him in keeping the peace, in pursuing and arresting felons, etc. And so how many of you here are posse? All of you are. That's right. I don't see anybody below the age of 15, maybe one below the age of 15. The rest of you are part of the posse. And your sheriff may not have any of this in his mind, which is part of the reason why we're conducting this seminar today. We want to help train and equip sheriffs all over the country, but we know that if we do so, they're not going to be able to stand up against the tyrant unless they have a posse ready and willing to stand with them, which is why you play such an important role in this as well. And so as we consider what your part is in the training that you're receiving today, if you haven't taken the next step, that is the U.S. Constitution, you need to take that. You need to have that understanding in your mind, because otherwise you won't know the boundaries. So if the federal officer's coming into your county to do some things that are against the Constitution, you've got to have that standard clearly in your mind, which is why we recommend our U.S. course that you can take here in Delaware. If you're not going to take it there, it's available online. It's available as a host kit. You take it home to your family and friends and conduct a course to train fellow members. But if we don't raise up posses that are going to defend and stand behind the sheriff of their county, we're going to lose liberty. It's down to that level now. Most states in the country are not defending their citizens against the federal incursion and the federal violation of the law. And they're doing so, we all know, because they're being bribed to do so. That is, the federal government takes an enormous amount of money out of that state in income taxes, and then it parcels back with all sorts of strings attached. If you do this, and if you do that, and if you do the other thing, then you get this money back. And so the states have become absolutely dependent on that federal treasury, that money coming back. And they've become convinced that, well, if I have to do what's right, according to the Constitution, I know that money's going to be cut off. That gravy train is going to stop. And they have to be willing to say, we need to stuff it up, and we need to say, yep, I'm going to cut it off. I'm not going to go for the cheese that puts me into that trap of having to do what the federal government tells me to do. But your elected officials are only going to do that if they know you're standing behind them. Furthermore, if you know the standard and you're calling them to that standard, say, Sheriff, I know what the standard is. I know what's going on that's violation of that standard in our county, and I'm willing to stand with you to resist it. If they have a posse of citizens behind them, like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, they can resist those encroachments of our God-given rights, those encroachments of our Constitution. But if they don't, my friends, I'm afraid liberty is going to be gone in America today. We're close. We're very close on the edge of losing that. When you consider what our founders paid in terms of their treasure, in terms of their blood, in terms of their lives, to secure the liberty that we enjoy today, I think of what John Adams, the second president, said. He said, if you don't preserve liberty, from heaven I will regret and repent that I ever gave half the sacrifice to preserve it for you. And so for each of us, myself included, we need to take the next step. We need to see that our sheriff is committed to this. And if he's not, we need to replace him with a constitutional sheriff, a sheriff who truly will follow the law, who knows what the law is. We need to educate ourselves and prepare ourselves to take that place in restoring true constitutional liberty in our land. Thank you so much.